Hey everybody, since this is going to be the last Zelda-themed episode of the year, just want to send a special thank you to all of you who've listened this far. It's been a really cool ride, and we have a lot of really good stuff coming up in the new year. And a very special thank you to all of my guests who spent their time and their talent and their memories here on the show talking about why Zelda is such an amazing, enduring franchise. There are lots of old episodes, so if you're just now checking it out, please do so. There's a lot out there, so by all means, give it a listen. And if you want to give me a very special holiday present, then leave a rating or a review on your pod player of choice. Podcast Addict is a good one. Good Pods is a good one. iTunes/Apple Podcasts is a great one. It would be very much so appreciated. Thanks so much again for listening, and let's get on with the episode. A blinding storm, a hero determined, a shipwreck, and one girl's sudden discovery. Within 50 seconds of hitting start, you know you're in for a ride. My personal journey with Link's Awakening started 3 years ago. I bought it on the soon-to-be-defunct 3DS shop with every intention of playing it right away, and it sunk into the dreaded backlog. Right? It's happened to all of us. It will continue to happen. We have more media than we'll ever consume at our fingertips in a lifetime. And I'm not really sure what made me dredge it up all those years after buying it. Maybe it was the overwhelming praise I had heard over the years, not only from friends and bloggers and people who I trust with their opinions. Every major outlet at the time was over the moon for it. EGM called it the best Game Boy game of 1993, and both Nintendo Power and IGN claim it's one of the top 100 games ever made. But it was more the people that won me over. Again, those friends and family who were just fawning over it. They loved it. I honestly don't know anybody who dislikes Link's Awakening. So regardless of all of the reasons, I blew the dust off my very pretty Zelda-themed 3DS and gave it a whirl. And within those initial 50 seconds, I just knew I was in for something very, very special. Link's Awakening is a game designed on a whim by passionate fans who wanted to see what they could create on a 4-bit system. And if you wanted to learn more about the development, the Gaming Historian does a great video on it. Check that out. I won't recap. But it's pretty amazing what they tried to do, because the game is a triumph of design, theme, play, and heart. It's a bite-sized bit of adventuring with a Thanksgiving's dinner worth of exploration, puzzles, and intrigue. This beloved title captured the hearts and minds of millions of kids today and back in 1993. So what do my friends think? What do you, the people, think? Hopefully the group of fans I've collected for this episode accurately represent just the length and breadth of this tiny title and what it meant to so many. Time to get the band back together for one more tour around Koholint Island as we begin sharing some dreams of the Windfish, The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening.
Down with Zelda from the very start. I got the heart, it's Mars to play the part. Down with Zelda. Creeping through with an overhead view, cause a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. So I stay on track, collect the facts, never cut slack, and I always always watch my back for Jack. Zelda, yeah. Don't understand I'm the man with the plan, cause the power's in my head and the power's in my hand. Zelda.
Okay, I don't know about you, but that really goes hard. That song bumps. I'm sorry. I remember that. I remember that commercial somewhere lodged in my brain. The power of him stomping that water, that puddle. It almost has nothing to do with Link's Awakening and is the entire opposite of that game. Like that, Link's Awakening is this charming little adventure. Here's this rapper just laying it down. Man, love that. Glad I unearthed that. Hope you are too. As we always do in this show, I like to start with first impressions. The moment these guests plug that cartridge into their Game Boy, hit power, and went on their adventure. We're going to start off with Seth from the All End podcast, followed by Games with Coffee, aka Ryan, then Mike Albertin of Games My Mom Found, and then finally Lord Reverend D of the Rulebooks Anonymous podcast. Link's Awakening.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever talked about Link's Awakening. Just to give you a little background for myself, I played Link's Awakening for the first time a couple of years ago. I did not play the remake. I played the Game Boy DX or Game Boy Color version. Yep. So I wanted to play it as it was released. I didn't want to play the redo. And it immediately shot up to around my number 3 or 4 favorite Zelda. I just kind of adore the scope of it and the scale and obviously the technical prowess. What's your take on Link's Awakening and what was your first impression of that game?
So interestingly, my first exposure to that game was like you with Link's Awakening DX. I got that when it first came out on Game Boy Color. I remember, this is a funny little memory. I remember we were on a family vacation. We would take an annual vacation to go to a family reunion in Kentucky. We would do that every year. And I remember I had my Game Boy Color, but I forgot my games at home. I didn't have any games with me. I was so upset. And it just so happened that Link's Awakening DX had come out around that same time, and it was on the store shelves. So I guess just to, shut me up or whatever, my dad took me to, I think it was a Walmart. And of course I saw Zelda on the shelf, and yeah, I grabbed it, and that was my companion for that trip. So when I think about Link's Awakening, I have this weird sense memory. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I think about games and I think about very specific things. So for me, when I think about Link's Awakening, I'm in the back of my dad's car and I'm smelling McDonald's fries,
totally. Yeah.
On a road trip. Yeah. That's what that game is like to me. And I remember, all of my cousins and whatnot wanted to go play in the pool, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to sit and play Link's Awakening in the room, So I have very fond memories of that, playing that when it came out. I must have been, 10 or 11 or something like that when it came out. And I love that game. And it was really kind of fascinating because it is having, especially playing it on the Game Boy Color, it is having a whole world in your pocket, and there was something kind of interesting about that, just interacting with this little pocket world that you carried with you. And I think it kind of plays with the themes and the story of Link's Awakening as well. This kind of concept of, nothing lasts forever, and it's this kind of fake imagined reality, and at a certain point you have to let it go, but it's just this little fake thing that lives in your pocket. It doesn't feel quite as real, in air quotes, as something like A Link to the Past, which feels like you're going to another place. Having something in your pocket and pulling it out and playing it in handheld mode feels like you're engaging with something that exists independently of you, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
It's weird, but that's kind of the vibe.
I feel like there's an abstraction, because of the dreamlike nature of the game, especially as you move throughout it, move forward through the experience. There's definitely a sense of, oh, wait, I'm here, but not, right? And and there's a choice you're making as a player, right? You're choosing, okay, here I am, I'm here, I'm playing this game. But yeah, I kind of get what you're saying. It's almost, again, an abstraction.
Tell me a bit about your first Link's Awakening experience.
Okay, for sure. So skipping a couple of years after 1994, so this would probably be roughly around the same time Pokemon came out. So I'm going to say about 1998 or so.
Yeah.
Right around that time, the Game Boy Color was coming out. And Link's Awakening DX was developed solely for the Game Boy Color. I mean, it was kind of like an in-between title. You could use it on regular Game Boys, but its real power shone when you use it on a Game Boy Color. So for Christmas of that year, 1998, I got a electric green Game Boy Pocket. Not the Game Boy Color. We wouldn't get that for another year and a half or something like that. That would be my brother's. Right. But my system was a Game Boy Pocket. That's one of those like see-through electric green ones. It's so cool, and I'm such an idiot. I was such an idiot for selling that when I was a kid.
No,
I sold it
hate
for
when that happens?
$50. So I'm like,
oh
my
no,
God, what an idiot!
Well, $50 is a king's ransom in when you're a kid, but boy, oh boy, man, that's a cool one. The lime green clear. Oh, that's rad, man.
Oh yeah, it was just the most coolest thing ever, and I wish I kept it. Oh well, anyways. So I had that, and the first game that I got with it was Link's Awakening. And, oh man, that was the transition going from Zelda 2, which I thought all Zelda games were side-scrollers up until that point.
Yeah.
Until I booted Link's Awakening and saw this as a top-down. I'm like, whoa, what is this? And then just got sucked into it, and it honestly took me forever and a day to just really figure that game out. I didn't understand anything about it. It's like you get to use items. I can switch my sword and my shield. Like I don't even have to I can even switch the button controls on with the sword and the shield. Like I can have the sword as a B button and the shield as an A button, or vice versa, or whatever. There's magic powder that I need. There's like puzzles that I have to solve. It's just like it was a bit overwhelming when I was younger.
Sure.
But it didn't stop me from trying to figure everything out. I used to farm rupees in the village. There's that patch of grass right above the shop. Not above the shop, above the game, the grain game. So I used to farm rupees.
Okay. Yeah.
I used to farm rupees in that field until I got 20.
Nice.
And then I played the crane game so I could get the powder, not knowing that I could have just instead gone through the mysterious woods, go through the cave, find the mushroom, and then bring it to the witch, who would just make me a batch for free. I thought, I need this powder. I'm going to have to
That's funny.
Play the crane game in order to get it. It's like...
Yeah. That's funny.
And I actually applaud the creators, the developers, for putting that in there, because, I mean, nowhere does it really... It doesn't necessarily obviously spell out that you have to kind of go through the forest and go through the caves and push a couple blocks here and there to get this mushroom. Like they already have it just kind of built into the crane game, where you can just kind of get it right at the start instead of having to try to figure that out. But it still took me forever because I was terrible at the crane game.
So what was the next game on the schedule, or on the life cycle of Mike Albertin? What was the
I played Link's Awakening next, because
that was next.
Again, another game my mom found. Actual game my mom found. She bought me Link's Awakening because I like Links to the Past, and it was a Zelda game. And Game Boy was a big thing for me because we would sometimes go on trips, like anybody with Game Boy. I had a Game Boy Color, and I had actually, first time I played Link's Awakening was Link's Awakening DX. That was the one that I had. I have never actually played the original. I mean, same thing, but I played a ton of the DX version. It was always in my Game Boy Color. It was something that I always took with me. A friend of mine who lived not too far, I used to see all the time, he also had Link's Awakening, and so me and him both were playing it at different times and would talk about it and kind of share secrets, because again, this was the day before the internet, so I couldn't cheat. And just kind of going through it, and the game took me a long time the first time to finish it, because trying to figure out different strategies, trying to figure out how to get through bosses, trying to figure out how to get into certain dungeons, and just that experience of it while playing it and having someone to talk about was, really special at that time. And I still really enjoyed Link's Awakening. It doesn't hold up, I think, as well as I remember, but I still loved it.
Yeah, I'm a huge Link's Awakening fan, and I only played it for the first time a couple of years ago for your show.
Yes.
I had never played it before that, and it was one of those on my 3DS. I bought it, and it's like, one day, DX version. And finally, for your show, is an excuse to actually play it, and I love it. I love it so much. It's so much flavor.
I love the idea that they were just trying to make Link to the Past on Game Boy and then realized, oh, wait a second, we can. And then we can make something different and market it.
So good. It's such a fun story of smart people doing smart things.
Because it wasn't even a game that was supposed to be made. They were just fucking around after work when they were, instead of going home, off the clock. And then they're like, wait a second, Nintendo can sell this. And then it became an actual project.
It's an interesting what people can do when they have no constraints. Like when they literally left their own devices and make this really weird existential quandary type of game that's deep and interesting and fun and full of flavor. God, so much flavor in Link's Awakening. It's amazing.
You have the Yoshi doll, you have other characters, you have a chain chomp. I mean, things that would never show up because they couldn't, but because it wasn't a licensed project, and they just kind of, took Nintendo stuff and just threw it in there for the hell of it. And then when they finally market it, that's why it's all a dream, because they're like, how can we make this work?
So tell me your experience of playing Zelda on the Game Boy.
That was one of the games that hardly ever left my Game Boy, honestly, because I would play through, I would beat the game, I would delete my save, and I would just start over, and I would just play over and over and over again.
Interesting.
I think I still have my original copy somewhere, too.
Nice. That's cool. What drove you to try again and again and again?
For the most part, it was just I really enjoyed the gameplay. I enjoyed all of the different weapons and stuff. This was also one of the first Zeldas that had a jumping mechanism when you got the Rock's Feather. So that just added a different dimension to it. Portability was also really nice just because, again, I didn't have a Super Nintendo at the time, but I could play Zelda on my Game Boy, and I could just bring that wherever.
That's interesting. Where was the... This is going to be a strange question. Where did you take your Game Boy to play Link's Awakening?
Vacation, summer camp. Well, not really summer camp, but like summer program. Just hang out under a willow tree, just play my Game Boy.
That's cool. That's cool. That's a very nostalgic, wistful memory. Under a willow tree, playing the Link's Awakening. That's just like a weird little painting, like a little 8-bit art painting. I can see that as.
Next up, Greg Sewart of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of videos, Christian of the Franchise Festival podcast, and then finally, Alan Petrozzi. You know Alan, he's been on a lot, especially with this Zelda series, joins us to talk more about their first impressions with Link's Awakening.
Speaking of another game I'd like to touch on real quick before we close out, is a game we could probably spend a lot more time on, which I never played until last year. Last year was the first time I played it, which was Link's Awakening. On the Game Boy, of course. I played the DX version, which was the color version. And did you play Link's Awakening at all? Or
I did not when it first came out. I had a friend who was super into the Game Boy. I liked the Game Boy a lot, but it just, for some reason, Link's Awakening was a real blind spot for me. And I think it was because when I don't know how to describe this properly, but I think it was when I borrowed it from him back in the day, it felt... Game Boy games when you were playing like the little brother to like the NES or Super Nintendo game that you had played already, there were elements of it that felt so simplified. Like I think of something like Metroid 2 compared to the original Metroid, and it just, it was missing something, almost an intangible thing. And with Link's Awakening, I always found like it felt a little arcadey to me. I think is the only way for me to describe it. So it just didn't resonate at all. And then I got out of Game Boy and Game Boy collecting and playing probably in the early 90s when I got my Genesis, basically. And then I got way back into it again when the Game Boy Color came out, and I bought Link's Awakening DX. I never played it. I had it for years and years and years, and every now and then I'd pick it up, and it was kind of the same thing. It's like, well, this isn't what I want from a Zelda game. There's just something about this that doesn't do anything for me. So I've been the same as you. I really didn't play it until a couple years ago, but that was when the Switch remake came out, and then I played through it, and I loved it. It was great, but I don't know what it was about that game. It just didn't ever do anything for me.
That's interesting because we bounce off of games for different reasons. There's tons of games that people adore, and I'm just like, I don't know. I just tried it, and Red Dead Redemption 2. I didn't want to. I played it for an hour, and I said, I don't know. This is just. I don't want to track my foot power and this power and that meter and hunger. And I don't know. And you just bounce off for whatever reason, and you come back to it. I love Link's Awakening, and when I played it, I know people love that game, like adore it. But I was trying to divorce myself of popular opinion, and I played it trying to be as objective as possible, and boy, did I enjoy it. It's a delicious snack of a game. And
it really is.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's why I didn't get into it at first, because that's not what I wanted.
Right, yeah. And it's fine, I guess, as an older person, with kids and the job and the rest of it, having a delightful little snack is good. That's a good thing for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I appreciate that more now, but back then, like I was like, well, I want to jump in. Instead of that, I was playing Final Fantasy Legend. It's just something that was way more intimidating and way more hardcore, I guess would be a way to put it.
Sure.
Whereas now, you're right. Like, look, if I had that decision to make now, at my current age and in my current situation, I would absolutely pick up Link's Awakening 9 times out of 10.
Did you play Link's Awakening around release? Because you said you were kind of in the hype bubble.
Yeah, I played the Game Boy Color version of it, the colorized version of it for the Game Boy Color at just about the time of release. If it wasn't at release, it was 6 months later or something. Got it for Christmas.
Cool. Awesome. So what did you think about it at the time?
I liked it a lot. I found it really obtuse, though. And this is coming from a person who primarily up until that point had played a lot of side-scrollers where the goals were very clear. I guess Link's Awakening may have been the first game that I played, because this would have been slightly pre-Pokemon, I think. It's right around the same time, because Pokemon would have really been my first RPG.
Yeah.
But Link's Awakening really kind of threw me off with its puzzle solving and item collection and so forth. I really struggled with how to get through it. And it feels silly going back now. Like if you replay it now or play the remake, which is also excellent, it's pretty clear what you're supposed to do most of the time. But back when I first played it, I was a little baffled. So I liked it, but I didn't love it.
Interesting. So have you played it since?
Oh, yeah. I think it's excellent now. I've played it. I played it. The DX version on the 3DS back in 2016 or so in the run-up to Breath of the Wild, and then I played the remake of it when we were recording our podcast episode on
it. Right. Yes.
Because that remake is super faithful. It just changes the graphics engine.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask about the remake. I played it for the first time maybe 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Just one of those bucket list kind of games. Like,
sure.
I've never played Link's Awakening. Let me get on that. I played the DX version, the Game Boy. Whenever I play games for the first time, I really want to try and play the original,
of course,
as it was released. Because I like that authentic experience, even though, unless people tell me, no, you need to play the remake.
Right.
There's lots of quality of life stuff that, trust me, you're not missing out. So I played the original, and I found it wonderful. It shot to the top of my Zelda list. Like, it really shot very close up to the top, maybe 2 or 3, depending on the day.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't own it on Game Boy or anything like that. I emulated it. I played it, I think, when I was like 14 or 15, actually.
Okay.
And at that point, I already knew about all of its inspirations and where it, what came about to make it happen and all of that. So at this point,
Right.
I was just like, okay, with all that in mind, I should probably play this as a Zelda fan. It just didn't seem right not to. So
Sure.
I acquired it and I started up and started to play it. And I immediately understood like what they meant with like it being weird. I'd never seen Twin Peaks though at that time at all. I just knew that
Mm-hmm.
they said, "Oh, it's this weird thing that's trippy. Here's a couple of like things to help sell that, to help illustrate my points," kind of thing.
Sure.
So I knew it was very weird, and I really enjoyed all the different cameos. In fact, it was actually funny because my friend did own it. I didn't get a chance to play it. And I actually, because of that game, thought Chain Chomps were just called Bow Wows officially.
Nice.
It was very funny when I was like, "Oh, right, okay, so here's where that Bow Wow comes into play." And then whenever I saw people playing like Mario 64 on the first level, I'm like, "Oh, make sure you avoid the Bow Wow. It's gonna like, what's the Bow Wow? That's Bow Wow. Who else would it be?" Great stuff. But
and you got actually it's Chain Chomp.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do it myself. So when it happens to me, I'm like, okay, that's fair. I deserve it.
It's fair. It's fine.
But I do remember that, and then I do remember because I had played A Link to the Past. I got pretty far into it at that point. That game was one of those games where it took me a very long time to beat that game. A lot of different, coming back to it at different points in life because I didn't own a Super Nintendo either. So it had to come from like me playing the Game Boy Advance version to me playing it emulated to me owning it on a SNES Classic to finally beat it.
Right.
Crazy stuff, that journey.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I'm not good at 16-bit games. I love them to death because, I had a Genesis and that was what I played a lot. Didn't beat many of those games either. So it's just one of those things. I definitely love it and I always try it and don't always beat it, but I always enjoy it along the way. But from that game, just like being absorbed in this world that had no like ties to anything that I would imagine Zelda. It was a lot like Breath of the Wild. I'm like, this is so different. Breath of the Wild is like, sometimes you wouldn't know what this is referencing until you either open up the map or you look at it from a certain angle and you're like, oh my God, that's Lon Lon Ranch.
Yeah.
in Link's Awakening, a lot of that was just from like, okay, this has all the same trappings of Zelda, of Link to the Past that I played, and the Oracle of Seasons and Ages that I've also played. I actually beat those, I think, first, then went to a Link's Awakening. Wow. So I had those experiences a lot. So like, this is all very similar, but like, oh my goodness, this is, I don't know how to describe this, this like strange feeling of like being in like a fan fiction, just kind of like, why is this all here? I don't necessarily care, but I'm here for it. And I wasn't really necessarily a big fan of like the overarching story of like trying to get these instruments to wake up yourself with the windfish, essentially. But I had fun along the way. It was a great time. I really enjoyed like doing the fetch quest and stuff like that, because that was always been something I like to do, is like like get A to go to B to go to C to go to D. So that was always fun.
That's interesting.
That was a standout.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's actually one of the things I don't like about it, which is cool. I mean, that's perfectly fine. That's interesting that you appreciated it, and I think it's very interesting that it took you that long to finish Link to the Past. That's really, really interesting. It kind of went through all those iterations. But as far as Link's Awakening goes, yeah, it's this weird Twin Peaksy style. Calling it like a fan fiction is very good. I like that because it feels like it, right? Like it feels like some goofy side story someone wrote up in their basement, right? Like the windfish and instruments and the island, and
then sprinkle Mario characters into it for not really any reason other than the fact that we can.
Why not? And then learning, 20 years later, yeah, that's why they did it. They did it because they could. Sure, let's just sprinkle Mario characters in it. Let's throw in Bow Wow. Let's throw in Wart from Mario 2. I miss Wart. We have to free Wart as a society.
The fun
There's
part
Wart,
too is
just hanging out.
like eventually you'll unlock, you'll watch like top 10 videos of like, here's all the things you've missed while playing Link's Awakening, and realizing like that was a reference I didn't even know.
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Right was a Sims reference? What?
Yeah, I see. Yeah, no clue of that. I played it again 3 years ago. I didn't catch that till I watched one of those things.
It's been a while since I've shouted out a podcast or highlighted a show, so the time is now. Let us do it immediately. So if you enjoy music of all types and stripes, you really should lend an ear to Retro Groove Podcast. Hosts Adam and Liam tackle a variety of fascinating topics, from celebrating the top 5 front women of rock to dropping knowledge on the great Bob James. And if you don't know who he is, you really should give the episode a listen. Your mind will be blown. The duo deliver insightful detail along with a boatload of laughs. It's a really fun show. They do an awesome job covering music of all varieties. If you're a fan, you definitely need to check it out. Available wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or connect with them on Twitter at retrogroove_pod. And speaking of music, see what I did there? The master of the segue. or the semi-master of the clumsy segue. You can't talk about Link's Awakening without talking about music. You just can't. It's next to impossible. So we have Andrew Craig, Dan of RetroLogic, and then the Reverend D returns to talk about this amazing 4-bit soundtrack.
Yeah, so Link's Awakening, again, is just, and again, we talked about the music. Man, I almost can't have a conversation without talking about the music and how it's probably one of my favorite Zelda soundtracks. I mean,
yeah,
it's just...
There are so many themes that we still know that are incorporated into that, and so many just weird, off-the-wall things. You hear the music from the Animal Village, and it's going to be stuck in your head for a week.
Absolutely. We might have mentioned it before, but I just want to capture it again if we haven't. Which of the songs from Link's Awakening are the most personal to you?
The most personal is probably Ballad of the Windfish. When you first hear it is when you first put all the instruments together, and it's sort of this... It starts off sad and lonely and then becomes triumphant as the drums come in, and then by the end they've sort of turned it into this really hopeful piece. And any music that can thematically be all of those things is just wonderful. Yeah. My favorite piece, though, is the credit roll.
Oh, wow, okay.
Just because they took the Zelda theme, took the opening notes of it, and did this just little twist on it that makes it feel like a side adventure.
But among all that, too, the music is, I don't know, it's beyond reproach. And Zelda music's always really good. I think you can say that pretty much across the board. But I don't know, Link's Awakening for some reason is fantastic. What's some of your favorite tracks from the soundtrack?
I can't, man. I mean, if you play do 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 do, tears are gonna come to my eyes.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
You know.
And then
yes, Marin's song. Trying to remember how it goes now. I can't.
I'll throw it in here.
Throw it in there.
I'll loop it in underneath this.
And my most recent playthrough was the Switch remake.
Okay.
Which I thoroughly enjoyed.
I have to say that one of the things that I really looked forward to in that game was going up to the top of Mount Koholint and playing the Ballad of the Windfish. That's one of my favorite Zelda tracks of all time.
It is stunning. It is a stunning track. The music in Link's Awakening, and we even talk about music for the other games. I might just do a whole show on Zelda music because it is across the board wonderful. I mean,
yes,
every Zelda game has good music. And it's amazing because they're just classic heroic themes for the most part, right? But things like the Ballad of the Windfish, it's pretty and it's a little mournful, but it's still lush and beautiful. It's a gorgeous piece of music. I mean, yeah,
and even with the chipset that they had at the time, I mean,
right?
it still hit really hard.
Yeah.
They didn't have to go that hard, but they did, and a beautiful piece of music.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I totally agree.
If you're really into the music from The Legend of Zelda and you want more of this conversation, please check out last week's episode when I talked to Andrew Craig about his involvement with the Symphony of the Goddesses. It was a great interview, and it was really cool to see behind the scenes of how that was put together and some of the people he met. It's a great companion piece to this conversation about Zelda music, so please check that out if you haven't. Next up, Seth, the Reverend D, Dan, and then Games with Coffee all return to talk about the look of the game, the way Link's Awakening feels in your hands, and the game's many innovations. Gameplay, I think, is really very much so Link to the Past, and of course that was the goal, right? To kind of do Link to the Past on the Game Boy, which is a technical marvel. It's incredible what they do with that game. You were talking earlier about scope, right? And I think Link's Awakening really captures scope beautifully well. I think it's just big enough,
right? And
based on its technical limitation. For that, what do you feel about kind of the play of the game? Which is always obviously half of what we do in games.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much perfect, and it was great back then, and it was great to come back to on the Switch. I would be really curious if you get around to playing the remake. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on it because I found it just really enjoyable. Like it really does still hold up. They didn't, it was kind of like a nice validation of like that, like, does this still hold up to sort of like modern scrutiny? And it does. And it was just like a fun thing to go back and replay and see what still worked and what was still special about Link's Awakening. I think the flow of that game is really good. I think it's nice and bite-sized. You could play through that game in, probably 10, 12 hours. It's not this massive adventure, and it has something to say at the end of it. You definitely have, you're left with an emotion, like you're left with a feeling at the end of it, and there are things you can pick apart, and and there are things that you can really kind of marinate on and think about. And I really like that about Link's Awakening. You don't get that in a whole lot of Zelda games. A lot of times Zelda games are, here is the story and don't think too much about it.
Right.
But with Link's Awakening, it really does kind of leave you with something to chew on. And it's the kind of game where when you see that ending for the first time, you'll just sort of find yourself like looking at the ceiling for a little bit, contemplating your existence.
Obviously, what most people marvel at that game, even just by looking at a screenshot or a video, is the visuals, right? How they essentially took the Link to the Past and put it on a Game Boy. How does that strike you, or how did that strike you as a kid, and how does that strike you now as someone who's obviously played Zelda all the way through to modern day?
I still think it's very impressive what they were able to do, just because the Game Boy at the time were very simplistic graphics for the most part, but they still managed to put as much emphasis and pull so much out of that system in Link's Awakening. It was just really amazing. The monsters, the world, everything just had such great detail.
And I think the game also has a lot of really good flavor too. More than I think I would say most Zelda games, just in variety and in characters and just kind of quirkiness. Obviously we've probably all seen the gaming historian video on how it was made, where the designers were kind of on their off hours, just hanging out. Now let's make a Link to the Past on the Game Boy. And they kind of sort of did, but they utilized like all their imagination and all their ingenuity to create that.
I'll never forgive them for Eagle Tower, though.
People hate Eagle Tower. Eagle Tower is brutal. What's your take on Eagle Tower? What could they have done to make that better?
Well, I think I told the well-read mage this, but it was throwing the ball to knock down the pillars, and it was always the one where there was that massive, I think it was like four block gap to knock down the pillar. It took me so many tries. It still takes me so many tries to get it done. I can never get it in first try. And it's like I have to slog all the way back up.
Yeah. It's really tricky. I never minded the boss because the boss, the one with the bird at the top.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. That I guess I know it's frustrating to fall off and go back down. I actually didn't have the biggest problem with it. There were other bosses I had nightmarish problems with. I just couldn't figure out. There was one in particular. There's 4 corners. Of course there's 4 corners. It's a room. Of course there's 4 corners. There's like 4 holes, and there's like this snake comes out.
Oh yeah.
And the idea is to grapple, or I think it's to grapple them, pull them, and then strike at their heart in the middle of their body. I hated that thing. That was just frustration time. I had the hardest time with that particular encounter.
He wasn't too hard for me for the most part. Granted, I made sure that I had plenty of fairies with me just to make sure. But
well, yeah,
it was. I think the one that gave me the most problems was the face.
Really, face gave you a hard time. Okay.
Yeah, because a couple of times I went in without bombs, and that was just poor management on my part.
That's tricky. That's tricky. And also another cool mechanic of Link's Awakening, people at least I know don't really talk too much about, is combining of items. The first time I had to use the run and jump blew my mind, because the game explicitly in one of the dungeons you have to master dash jumping, which means you have to equip both of those items to do that dash jump. When I realized that's what you had to do to make that jump, again, I lost my mind. And bomb arrows. And it's one of those things where, wow, I don't think Zelda's ever explored that as far as I remember. Like combining combining items to do different things.
I ashamedly have never played Link's Awakening or Link to the Past.
Okay,
so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. You can't do that in Link to the Past. I know that. Okay. It's just another really cool innovation that I wish the series would, introduce elsewhere. It was just a fun way to make those unitaskers multitaskers.
If I remember correctly, Miyamoto was famously pretty hands-off with the development of Link's Awakening.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So,
it was like a side project.
Yeah. He was like, go do a thing. And so they blew the story out of the water because you were like,
we can literally do anything we want.
Let's do it.
No, it's incredible. Again, and I love the length of it. Zelda games they're big games. Even the 16-bit ones and the 8-bit ones, they're chunky games. And Link's Awakening is such a fantastic. It's not a snack by any stretch of the imagination.
10 12 hours if you have a bit of a guide through it. 8 to 10 hours. I needed a guide when I was 10 years old. There's no way I would have gotten anywhere in that game without some kind of help. And honestly, it's not the easiest Zelda game to understand what the next thing to do is, which is one of its downfalls, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to beat. Like, I think it was probably a couple of years of me getting through that game to finally like figure everything out.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of the issue with it is definitely in the fetch questy type stuff. There's a lot of that. You know,
and it's not
bring the
totally
bananas
clear.
to the coconuts, to the monkeys, and the monkeys hand you a key that you got. And you don't quite know what to do with any of it because none of it makes logical sense.
And it kind of does. Like, if you're in the right place at the right time, you can kind of get around it, but like,
it's a lot of that. So I recommend a good spoiler-free walkthrough for it, just to get through those things. And then for the dungeons and for the combat, just figure it out because that is the fun of it. I would say one of my favorite elements that, again, I don't know if it's been ever duplicated, and please correct me if I'm wrong on that, is the ability to combine items. To actually put away your sword and use a bomb and an arrow to do a thing.
Okay, that's good. That's good because I've been playing Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, and I've yet to actually encounter a similar situation where I had to use like two items in combination in tandem with one another. Usually you'd use the one item and then you'd switch it off for, like, say, the feather, for instance, to use it. Like, best example I'd say is the Pegasus seeds. You have to break one open in order to, to get the Pegasus dash, and then you have to switch over to the feather in order to use it. But you can't just combine it as one thing, like in Link's Awakening. So it's really fascinating that Link's Awakening allows you to create those bomb arrows. And actually, that's the first origination of the bomb arrows itself. And this would be replicated both in Twilight Princess, which is one of my favorite 3D Zelda games. I can't wait to start streaming that one. It's a dream of mine. I love that game so much. And of course in Breath of the Wild.
Right.
So yeah, and I'm pretty sure they're in other Zelda games, but I haven't played. Like, I'll be honest, I haven't played each and every single Zelda game that's been out.
Same, I haven't. My big holes are Majora's Mask and Wind Waker. Those are my biggies.
Oh man, you should hang out for when I do my Wind Waker streams, man.
I have to get my hands on a copy of Wind Waker. I have a Wii that's half broken, so I need to repair it before I can stick anybody's game in there. This treasured game that really needs to work and I can't break. But anyway, I also, when it comes to those combining the items, doing the dash and the jump, because again, there is a jump.
Yep.
Yeah, there is a jump if I'm correct.
Yep.
And doing the dash and the jump, there is a section in one of the dungeons that requires you to do this.
Yes.
Like you cannot. I think it's the third dungeon.
Yeah, it's the third dungeon. It's the Key Dungeon. I think it's called. It was called.
Yes,
Key Cavern.
I think you're correct.
Key Cavern.
Yes, and it requires you to master this.
Yes.
And the minute I realized that's what I had to do, I felt like a golden god. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is, how come I can't do this? And I love the risk reward, right? You can walk around with the feather and the dash boots, the dash and the jump, but if you run into an enemy, you could get slaughtered real quick. So it's that risk reward, and it saves the inventory tax of going into the menu, which I'm not gonna lie, it's a bit of a pain in the DX version at least, but it's such a wonderful thing. I love when games allow you to. I love when games let weapons be multitaskers and not unitaskers.
Yes.
Which I think a lot of games nowadays fall short in. You just get a weapon, and it's just a weapon, or it opens a door. It's like it's not usable for other things. And Link's Awakening is great at that, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely for sure. Everything in Link's Awakening has multiple utilities to it, and it really does kind of carry over in certain aspects to other Zelda titles. Again, going back to Breath of the Wild, the utility of the weapons in that game is just astronomical.
Oh, fantastic.
I mean, yeah, sure. Okay, they break. Honestly, if they didn't break, you'd have like a gajillion weapons that you wouldn't have any idea what to do with. So that's me getting on my soapbox for breakable weapons on Breath of the Wild there, but we can carry that on a different conversation.
One of the most obvious miracles, for lack of a better term, is the visuals.
Yes.
Literally putting a Link to the Past visuals on a Game Boy, creating a world that feels big, even though it's very small. I think the overworld map, I think I read somewhere it'll take you 7 minutes to cross it, which isn't a lot of time, obviously, but it feels so big and lived in. Because they had to stuff so much in there. Like every screen has nearly every screen has something cool. What's your take on the visuals and maybe even just the design of Link's Awakening from like the overworld point of view?
Oh, it's an absolute charm. Everything is just beautifully designed, and the design is just very intentional, given the limitations of the Game Boy itself. Each screen has its own like kind of lived in space, and like you said, it takes about 7 minutes to cross the island from one side to another, and in that you go through all kinds of like different ecosystems. You're like going through a deep dark forest, you're going through a large grassy plain, you might end up going past a pothole maze, waterfalls, a bay in the middle of the island with a giant catfish dungeon in it, the animal village, and then on the other side there's a desert. There's like mountains and it feels
cool.
like an actual lived-in world in that sense. And it's just so beautifully designed. It's just been fantastic for the limitations that they had on that tiny little system. Like the way they pulled it off is just perfect.
Yeah, it's a masterful experience. And you said, and lived in is a very good way to put that, because I think the Link to the Past does the same thing. I think Link to the Past does feel very lived in. But as the games get bigger, it feels less. As the games get bigger, that sense of place and being lived in, I think, diminishes. Ocarina of Time is a good example.
I agree.
Yes, the first time you gallop into Hyrule Field, you're like, oh my lord, I am like, this is freedom.
Yeah.
But then you realize there's nothing there. There's nothing. There's nothing there. It's just like a hub to get to different places. Link's Awakening, I don't know. Yeah, I agree with you. It's so beautifully designed. The characters, the animations are great. You got Chain Chomp. What else do you need?
Man, come on.
Chain Chomp rules. How could you not love Chain Chomp?
Now listen, I like a chain chomp just as much as the next person, right? What's there not to like? It's a chomping little ball head on a chain that strains against its bonds. It's wonderful. But you know what? I will take every single one of my patrons over that adorable ball and chain any day of the week. Want to send a quick shout out to my wonderful patrons, including Ryan Payne of the Gamers Week podcast, Seth Sturgill of the All In podcast, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, the Let's Play Princess, Games with Coffee, who you just heard from, a mastermind, a genius of Zelda knowledge. Thank you for your patronage. Patrice Millette, BT Goebbels, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Dan of RetroLogic, and the one and only Pete Harney. 2 thin bucks gets you access to polls, early releases of the show Friday instead of Monday, so you have all weekend to get caught up as opposed to all week when you're busy. I know how that is. And a private channel on my Discord, my brand new Discord. You get your own space to hang out with patrons. I'm posting special links to things and images, and I'm doing little fun facts of every episode. These episodes require a lot of finagling and work, and I'm doing kind of little, almost, I don't know, liner notes in that patron-only channel. And there's some patron-only content coming as well. So $2 gets you lots of bonus content here from A Gamer Looks at 40, so please take advantage of that if you feel so inclined. Let's get back to the episode. Now, whenever you have a Link's Awakening conversation, it is nearly impossible to do so without talking about the ending. This ending, I experienced it as an adult, and it blew my mind. I can't imagine my confusion or lack thereof as a child. And it's such an interesting piece to this puzzle because it really does invite a lot of interpretation and a lot of thoughts on it. Just be aware, these conversations, when I had them, really required me to state my thesis on the ending multiple times. The first clip you're going to hear has my thoughts of what the ending is about, my opinion, and then we kind of move away from that, and I cut it out from the preceding interview sections. I didn't want you to hear me say the same thing over and over and over again. I picked the best one, that's in my opinion, and went with that. So if it sounds a little choppy, that's exactly why. I probably shouldn't mention it. You probably would not have noticed, but hey, you're discerning podcast listeners, and I want to treat you as such. Games with Coffee returns to talk about his opinions on the ending. Dan from RetroLogic joins the conversation, and then Christian returns to close out part 1 of the ending conversation.
So that was neat, and then going through the story, the nightmares, the fact that the island is nothing more than a mirage, which was super creepy at the time. I was like, I was right around the time when I was playing Final Fantasy VII, which has still slightly scarred me for life, but it's not as bad as it was before. But like it was pretty bad at certain points. But like we were so blessed to have all these really deep, meaningful, and very dark games growing up, man. I feel like we were really blessed to have those in our lives because like it really helped to shape the imagination and just really push the boundaries of what we can create and what we can experience as people, I think.
I think that's interesting. And I think as a slight side diversion, I think game developers trusted us as kids more than really any other medium did, right? I think developers understood, you know what, these games are usually played by children, but you know what, children have fantasies, right? They play, you know, they'll play. My son he's 5, almost 6, and he walked into, it was breakfast time. He walked downstairs with this monster truck in his hand, and monster truck jumps and crashes into death, and he smashes it like into the wall, not hard, but like pushes into the wall, and I'm like, oh, that's my morning. Good morning. That's the first thing I get to hear. Those are the first words I heard that morning. But he's playing and death and shooting, right? It's, you know, obviously it's not the greatest thing in the world that he's exposed to that, but I think game developers trusted kids to kind of deal with these heavier themes. Link's Awakening, oh boy. I mean, I would say that's probably one of the darkest stories in Zelda. I mean, I know people will cite Majora's Mask, but Zelda is existential. Link's Awakening is existential, in my opinion.
For sure.
What's your take on the story? First off, what's your take on the story? What is the island indeed a dream of the windfish? Is it real? Is it fake? Is Link gonna die at the end? Because they don't look good. He's floating on a barrel. That ain't great.
Yeah. No.
What's your take on it?
Oh yeah, for sure. I completely agree. My take on this is that the island itself is nothing more than just a dream. It's just it's an existential nightmare that the windfish was forced to come up with because of the nightmares. And then when he wakes up, it all just vanishes as if it was just nothing more than a dream. And then it makes you think, you know, what if our lives are nothing more than dreams, you know? What if we're just pieces of consciousness floating around some great grand dream of someone who when they wake up, will we cease to be, or will we like have some sort of existence beyond that? We don't know. We never know, right?
That's true.
It gets you thinking about that, and this is also probably where my existential crisis has originated from. Now I think about it. Oh no, well,
sure. I think a lot of kids' existential first taste of panic about your place in the universe maybe happened with Link's Awakening. But my question then would be, well, how does Link fit into that? Like, how does Link fit into joining the dream? Or is he into a dream of the windfish? And if so, how come at the end he's floating on a barrel with the windfish flying overhead?
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because I've read a bunch of fan fiction about this.
Okay, I have not. So I'm curious. I mean, I should probably study up and I should probably read up before these conversations.
I'll just say before you do that, be forewarned. Some of them are great. Some of them not so much. So you really got to wait around the weeds before you find some gemstones there. Just saying. But
fair enough.
A couple of interpretations of the story of the windfish and Link's Awakening is that in some cases Link was just an accidental traveler. He wasn't even intending to head to Koholint in the first place. He was just in between. He was in between lands, just traveling along, heading back to Hyrule after a long journey. And then somehow he just gets drawn into this dream. Whether it's from the windfish himself, subconsciously reaching out to a hero to free him, or just by pure happenstance, can be interpreted in so many different ways. My interpretation is that because of Link's ties to the overarching world of Hyrule and the goddesses, and his place in the mythos as the holder of the Triforce of Courage. He's drawn. He's almost magnetized to the point where trouble is just drawn to him. He just gets himself into all kinds of crazy situations, either because of his status as a hero or just sheer plain terrible luck.
Yeah.
So in terms of Link entering the dream and then leaving out of it, his role is fulfilled. He's floating on a barrel. We don't know what his ultimate fate will lie. In some cases, in some fan fiction I've read, Link does pass away, but then his spirit becomes reincarnated into another Link, and the cycle continues over and over again for like eternity. In other cases, he somehow gets rescued. But it's it leads to interpretation whether or not Link survives at the end of this or not. So
that's very interesting. I have my own thought on it, and I don't read the fan fiction. I just like my version of it.
Yeah, for sure.
I enjoy my versions. So I'm just like, it's my version. That's what I want to hear, and I don't want to hear anything else. But I do like
There's no wrong answer. Let's just put it that way.
I guess there isn't. And before we continue, may I just preface, this is a Game Boy game that we are talking about this like it's Breath of the Wild. Like, we are talking about this game with themes and different interpretations and existentialism.
But man, that's Zelda, though. That's what Zelda is all about. It makes you think about these things.
Not usually, though. I don't. And this is me personally. Again, what I'm here for. I'm there for Zelda, for puzzles and for throwing my sword at things and hitting things in the eye. I like that and the exploration. I'm especially Breath of the Wild. I am there for exploration. That's what I was there for, and I got that in a huge way.
Oh, yeah,
Story is always fifth on the list for me when it comes to Zelda, and I know it's important to others, which is why I like these conversations.
Yeah,
because I can learn a little bit, which is cool. Here's my question to you that'll lead into some of my thoughts on it.
Oh yeah,
is Link the villain in this? Is he the antagonist? Are you the player, the antagonist, the bad guy in this game?
That's a very good question, and it leads into like theories about whether like we're always the heroes of our own story. So whatever we feel like we're doing is heroic in our minds, but to the external viewer or to the audience, that might not be the case. As we're playing as Link, we're thinking, okay, yeah, we're going to save this island, we're going to save this fish, everything's going to be hunky-dory, everything's going to go back to normal until you hit the South Face Shrine and you realize, oh, what we're actually doing isn't necessarily very nice.
Right.
We're risking eliminating the existence of all of these people and animals and flora and fauna if we go forward and free this fish. But in Link's eyes, he's also come to the realization that he has to also get out of here. He can't spend the rest of his life here on a dream. Like, there's real life that has to be had.
Sure.
So it kind of, I mean, it's not really explicitly stated in the Game Boy games.
No, it isn't, no.
Not at all. But in some cases, I think Link had to wrestle with the decision himself, and then ultimately came to the conclusion, I have to go back to being the hero of Hyrule itself. Koholint is but a means to an end, in a sense.
Yeah, see, but I would argue that is not in the text of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, because I think the game wants you to draw your own conclusions.
Of course.
I would argue Link is absolutely the villain. He is
fair.
Absolutely the bad guy. And I'll go one step further, and I would like your opinion on this, because I've brought this up a few times and people kind of questioned, like, huh? I would go as far as to say that you, the player, are the villain. And I think Link's Awakening, through no fault of its own, I don't think this is an intentional choice, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it is, because it's genius. I think it's a mediation of our role as video game players in video games, where our goal is we take character, we move forward, we stab thing, we kill thing, get shiny treat, move on, and then the game is over.
Mm-hmm.
And the game, about halfway through, starts saying, please, please don't do this. Like, why are you trusting that owl? That owl is not to be trusted. Like, why? And you look at the world around you, and yeah, there's monsters and there's bad things, but everything's pretty good. And you realize if it's going with your theory, if the thing is Link has to go back to Hyrule to be the hero, you're willing to destroy all of this really cool stuff. You know, Marin, who's like adorable and is amazing and can sing beautifully, and the town of animals. There's a town of talking animals, my dude. Like, that should be enough for most people. Like, you're here and you're willing to risk all this and destroy all of this. And the enemies tell you, everything's gonna disappear, including you. Like, would you please stop coming into our homes, into our temples, and murdering us? Please. Could you stop?
Right.
But you, as video game player, do not. We are trained to follow the follow arrow, to finish the game, trust the narrator. And I almost like to think this game is a comment on that, where maybe you shouldn't. And honestly, like a few games I absolutely love who deal with this sort of thing, I think that the best ethical choice that you can make as a game player or a player of Link's Awakening is not play the game. That's the best ethical choice you can make, is not boot it up. And because that will prevent you, or just sit there and roam around and talk to the animals and not kill anything, of course, which wouldn't be much of a game. So right. After that long diatribe, what do you think about that? Like, what do you think about that?
Easy answer here. Actions have consequences.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
Actions, like, it just leads up into that. Like, we as players, we're trained to think that, our actions are good and moral and are worth something. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of collateral damage that lies in the wake of our heroics, so to speak. Right? There's in some cases, families are ruined, towns are destroyed. I've been recently playing Phantasy Star 4, and first time ever playing it too. And like, I'm in the middle of like shutting down systems that keep Motavia like habitable, and I'm thinking to myself too when I'm playing this, is like, this is not going to go down very well at the end of this. At least I'm hoping so, but I never played the game, so I don't know how this is going to end. But I'm like, we're shutting down all of these vital, critical life support systems on this planet. Everything's going to die in this place. Like, are we really doing the right thing, or are we just doing it just because the game says we have to do it, right?
Right.
It's an interesting moral choice. It's an interesting moral dilemma, I should say.
Yeah, and it's a moral dilemma we don't particularly care about as game players, because it is fun to take on the role of a character and engage in a story and finish the game, because there's always that end game. There's always the finish line.
It has, in my opinion, the best story and atmosphere of any Zelda game to date is Link's Awakening. Best story. You're constantly questioning your actions going through this world where you're being warned that, I don't know how spoilery you want to get on this.
Oh, the game, you can absolutely, this is intended to be spoilery, so that's fine.
It's a pretty big spoiler, but whatever. Throughout the game, you're being warned, like, hey, if you continue on this course of action, this island is going to be destroyed and everybody with it. So just tread carefully. And you're being reminded of that constantly, but you don't actually know what that means. You know, like you were in a shipwreck and you landed on the island and you're just trying to leave. So it's kind of like, well, if I want to leave, I got to wake the windfish. But if I wake the windfish, then everything that I know here goes away. And, you know, that would be fine. Like, I just landed here, so what do I care? Except Marin is like the sweetest, nicest.
I know.
Just, I don't do I want her to just suddenly not exist? No. But this is what I have to do. I have to leave. Like, I can't stay here, but I also, it's the most conflicted and well-told sort of mystery in a Zelda game, I think, to date. Just the entire world of the game is at stake because of you. So you're kind of the villain.
Well, that's the thing. I was going to say, is Link the villain in this one? And I say absolutely. Yeah. And I also, and I don't know if this was intentional or if this was just a byproduct of really good writing, I always look at this as almost commenting on games itself.
Maybe, that's good.
Like a BioShock, where the main conceits is, do you, the player, really have full agency over what you're doing, or are you just moving forward? Do you trust your narrators completely? Are you trusting? Mm-hmm. Do you know?
Oh, that's good.
You know, like it's commenting on the nature of games and nature of player agency in games, mm-hmm. right? You know,
and like weirdly and ironically, the best course of action for the inhabitants of the island is for you to just not.
Yeah,
just don't play. Don't play Link's Awakening because there's an entire there's an entire ecosystem at stake and sentient beings that you're going to destroy. So don't play Link's Awakening is the best way to win at Link's Awakening.
Did you when you were a kid playing this for the first time, and how old were you when you first played it? Was it around Game Boy era age?
10, 11.
10, yeah. Do you remember how you felt at because it's a pretty dark game, and I would say it's one of the darkest in the series, maybe other than Majora's Mask, which I can't speak to personally.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's a very deeply dark game. And Majora's Mask is a very openly dark game. You cannot get away from the disgusting, horrified, face of a moon staring down at you constantly in Majora's Mask. But on the surface, Link's Awakening is a pretty happy-go-lucky, normal Zelda game with a few dark spots, right? Mm-hmm. It's not until... And it's not even really... if you start to dig deeper into what's going on, do you actually get the horror of what you're doing. And as a 10-year-old, I'm not sure that I even really picked up. And I want to say I must have, because I certainly had some feelings for Marin.
Sure.
Knowing that what I was going into, and it warns you over and over and over again through text, like, hey, this is all gonna end really poorly, so don't do it, So yeah, I think like in the back of my mind I was aware, but it certainly wasn't a blatant dark, like a foreboding situation like Majora's Mask or to an extent Twilight Princess.
It's what I would say is a mature theme, and not mature in the way most people would present that, like, oh, mature. It's a mature thing, like, to really realize, oh, I'm doing something really wrong. And at the end, here's a question: does Link die at the end?
Yeah. Or was
he's in the middle of the ocean with a barrel. Ain't nobody there.
It's the sequel to Link to the Past, like canonically.
Okay.
But I don't know like what happens after that. It's one of the only times Nintendo's like, this is a direct sequel, like this happened and then this happened. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of theories you could go into.
Sure.
Nintendo's never really said like this is specifically what the island is about. Maybe he was dreaming the entire thing. Maybe, it was a representation of like his sub-psyche, whatever. Maybe it was all real and magical and he actually did destroy an entire island. So there's a lot of interpretations that can be placed. And there's actually some really, really smart people on YouTube who did some very deep dives into some of those theories. This is a game that is steeped in its own lore, that is totally separate from any other Zelda situation or game or anything. I mean, actually, there was a rumor going around. I remember to kind of jump into Wind Waker a little bit. There's a rumor going around that this island was going to pop up as like a secret thing, and then to everyone's sort of dismay, it did not. That was just a rumor. But that's why we don't believe rumors, kids.
That's right.
Firstly, what do you think about the themes of that game? And honestly, I'll just talk about it. What do you feel about the ending? How do you feel? Where does Link fit in to that story and fit into the whole story of the Windfish and the island? Like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, that ending is brutal. Are we allowed to do spoilers here?
Yes, 100% spoilers. Spoil away.
Okay, so Link's Awakening, the themes of the game throughout it, truth be told, I find, golly, and I hate to say this because I love that game. It's probably my third favorite 2D Zelda after Link Between Worlds and Minish Cap. But I find the themes of it a little undercooked during the game itself. And it's working within a framework of 2D action-adventure games from the mid-1990s and portable 2D action-adventure games at that. So, it's working within a pretty limited framework for storytelling. But I didn't get this deep sense of melancholy while playing it. But then you get to the end, and that is a bleak ending for those characters. Yeah, so, my interpretation's the same as yours, truth be told. The only difference is that I assume that he makes it, just because I just tend to assume that Link lives. I don't know, for better or worse. Fair. But fair. The Windfish waking up and Link waking up effectively dooms everybody of that world, and it's that meditation on dreams, right? That all of the characters in dreams seem sentient and fully functional when you're asleep and in that world, but then they just simply cease to exist. They cease to have had any history. They only existed as an outgrowth of you, and that is kind of a troubling concept to grapple with. So I really appreciate that about it.
I think there's also maybe themes of evil has to exist in the world in order for it to exist. Mm-hmm. There is no such thing as a utopia. You must have friction.
Right.
So again, I've thought about this game way too much. For, again, a Game Boy game.
No, it's nice. I'll have to think on that. No, I'll need to return to it with more of that in mind. I sell it a little short. I'd be curious to revisit it through that lens, for sure.
Yeah, and that's just a byproduct of me talking about it a lot.
Right. That's the critical engagement, right? When you critically engage with these things, they tend to end up much more deep than maybe you would have thought at first glance.
Next up, the Reverend D, Seth, and then Andrew all return to dissect and dive deep into this surprisingly complex ending.
What's your take on how this ends? Are you a dream of the windfish? Is it meant to be taken literally? This is a spoiler show, so feel free to be spoilery. If you listen to the show, you should expect that. So, what's your take on the story? Kind of where it goes?
I do like the way that the story went. I'm a firm believer that Marin did get her wish in the end to become a bird.
Okay.
Just because I wanna hope for the best with that. I do find it kind of sad that you're waking the windfish and then everything disappears. I wanna hope for the best for the characters, just because it makes me kind of sad to think that like Bow Wow is gone or the owl is gone and Taran is gone. So I want to hope that they get brought back.
So your thinking is that you are indeed a dream of. Excuse me. You're indeed a dream of the windfish. You awaken the windfish. He goes, spurts you out of the water into the ocean again. You look up and you see a seagull flying by, which I didn't even know that was a thing till someone mentioned it, and my brain exploded. I was like, oh, that's right. There's a bird, and the bird is Marin, and Marin wanted to be the. I was aghast at this thing I just didn't notice. So the bird comes across. So you feel that is it like a literal thing where all this was kind of a literal happening? Because it does show things disappearing, right? Like, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, as after you've defeated the final nightmares, when you play the song for the windfish, it plays Ballad of the Windfish, and it's like a more dramatic version, but you see everything start to fade out. Right. So I'm thinking, I guess I am taking it a little bit more literally that the island is a dream. But I still want to hope that maybe the windfish used his powers to like make some of his dream creatures real.
So I think not only is Link a villain, but I also think we as the player are villains, because the best moral choice in Link's Awakening is to not play the game at all. Because in order to play the game, we are making a morally onerous choice. That is my theory.
You know, that's a good point, because when you think about it, were the nightmares really doing anything outside of their dungeons? They were just hanging out in their dungeons.
Straight chilling. Yeah. Watching whatever their Hyrulean, or not Hyrule, sorry, whatever the version of Netflix is on that island. They weren't doing anything. You walked in, broke down their door, stole their key. Come on, steal their key. They had the key locked. They wanted some privacy. You bust in. Hey, give me that snare drum. No, don't. I'm here to protect the snare drum. Who told you to come here? That owl? That guy? You trust him? I don't trust him. I don't trust any of them. And I think you screw up.
Yeah.
I think you wake the windfish. The windfish, and what all this is a dream of the windfish. And let's be honest too. You could just turn around as Link and be like, you know what? I need more information before I actually come and murder you. So you hang out there, keep watching Stranger Things. I am going to go and get more information. And then realize, you know what? This island's not too bad. You know, there's a really cool town. There's this girl Marin I'm into, or baby into, I don't know. I lifted her over my head. All right, you know, that's usually a sign of friendship. There's a village of talking animals. Like, what? How cute is that? Like, what more do you need? Maybe he just stays there, right? But no, we as gamer people have to move forward and murder the monster that looks scary to progress. And I until I listened to the Well-Read Mages episode, I thought it was I thought at the end Link was just gonna be doomed to die on a barrel. Like, I really thought that was his fate, because he's in the middle of the ocean. Yeah. Although what his guest had said is very correct. There are waves, which implies, and the way the waves are on screen, it implies he's close to. No, sorry. The fact that there's seagulls at all and birds implies he's close to a shore.
See, here's what they can do now. Yes. Plot twist follow up. The windfish is actually a very bad creature, and waking it up was not a good thing. Yeah. It is now a big threat to the world. So now Link has to make up for it and put the windfish back to sleep.
That's right. Right. But not only get the windfish to sleep, but the windfish now has to like dream the same dream. He dreamed the dream of time gone by. So that's what the windfish needs to do. I like that. See?
Yeah.
I like that. I dig that. I think this is not a cheery story whatsoever. I think it's dark, depressing, and sad, and I like my version of it. But that's what's cool about this game. And let me just ask you this. We're talking about a Game Boy game, right? I always marvel at the fact that we can sit here and talk for 15 minutes and postulate theories about the game and player agency and all these interesting themes in a Game Boy game. Like, we don't do that about Tetris. You know what I mean?
Nope.
We don't do it about that 6 golden coins. But something about Link's Awakening brings that up.
I think that just really shows how strong the game is in terms of gameplay and story and just how loved it is by everybody.
What's your take on how this thing ends? And again, I think everybody has slightly different opinions, and I've heard a lot of different opinions. But what's your take on the ending of this game? I'm just gonna let you run with it, and then I might chime in with my thoughts. But go right ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it is positioned as like a Link to the Past like sequel where he's like on this ship or whatever, and there's like a storm that like destroys his boat. He washes up on, I think I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it Koholint or Koholint?
Something, yeah. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I don't know either. But he washes up on this island, and then you're gathering all of these instruments to play the Ballad of the Windfish and wake up the Windfish at the end, and it's sort of spoilers, I guess, revealed that this is all sort of taking place in the dream of the Windfish, and when the Windfish wakes up, the island and everybody that lives on it kind of slowly fades away, sort of including Marin, who is sort of like a quasi love interest, not really, kind of, right. But I really like how I like the idea of this being a dream and everything, and I like the idea of like, I like the idea of there not being an answer like that it is ambiguous, that you can kind of place whatever you want into that ending. And it kind of makes you think about like what makes an experience a real experience, right? It makes you think about, is it any less real because it was a dream? Were those people, were those connections any less real just because it all took place inside of the Windfish's dream? Like, not really. It's like the Super Mario 2 thing. It's like, were these experiences fake because they happened in a dream? The only difference between the quote unquote real waking world and the dream world is just that. Like, it's just in name alone. Really, the experiences are still just as real as anything else. And I think that's really interesting. It kind of breaks down the perception of reality, and it kind of makes you think about that. And is this connection to this character, Marin, who is sort of your kind of main, you have all these tangential connections to other characters that you talk with, interact with. There's the person that runs like the crane game and whatever, and there's like all these, fun little side characters. But Marin is really the character that you interact with a lot throughout the course of the game, and she sort of expresses this want to, like, if I were a seagull, I would leave this place and fly across the ocean and whatnot. And it's interesting is it almost feels like it's a reflection of Link's own sort of sense of freedom. Again, this is positioned as like a sequel to A Link to the Past, so Link leaves home and he picks up the sword and shield with the uncle, and he like saves the world, and he's on this ship to try to sail forth and go explore these other lands and stuff. And I think that Marin is sort of a reflection of that. But yeah, I think that was something. And there's this whole like secret ending where I don't know what you have to do, but if you do something, you can see Marin like in the sky, like after the credits and everything.
Yeah,
and,
as a seagull. Yeah.
And like, and it just goes to show, like, even though if this was fake or not, it was real to Link, and he's still thinking about it. And I don't know. I think that's handled really, really beautifully in this game.
I think it's so interesting that a handheld Game Boy game has such richness of theme and can explore so many interesting themes. It's my favorite story of any Zelda game, and I'm still obviously working through some of the bigger tentpoles, like again Wind Waker, and then after that will be Majora's Mask, which I've never played.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's very interesting how that is. I always take it personally as I think I won't say Link is an antagonist, but he's pretty close. And I also think I don't think this was I don't think this was intentional. If it was, it's genius. I think it's one of the first examples of a comment on gamers themselves, a commentary on video games themselves, because we are programmed as video game players to proceed to the next thing. Follow the owl. Owl tells you to go here, you go here. And it's, while you do have agency to explore, in the end, you're following a critical path to the end of the game. Yeah, that's kind of where I take it. I've chosen to take it literally, which I don't think so. I think it is a figurative thing, and I think the idea is, I think yours is really interesting too, to be honest with you, because the quick question is, does it matter?
Right.
If it's real or not, was that really the point of the experience? It's kind of like having a really good or bad dream. It doesn't matter if it was a dream. How you felt is what mattered. Like you walk up, oh, that was an awesome dream, or wake up terrified at night. It's real to you at the moment, and then the end result is how you felt about it. Like anything we experience.
Right.
So, that's interesting.
And it is. And it's fascinating too, when you go into the Windfish's egg and everything, and you take on the final boss is like this nightmare that is sort of other enemies from Link's like past and Ganon and things like that. And so I think about stuff like that, and I think about how this might be a reflection of the way Link feels about himself, how it might be like when we dream, we're sort of unpacking our thoughts and our emotions and the things that, that exist when we're awake. And I think that some of that is reflected in some of the characters, and, Majora's Mask is a really interesting comparison. Majora's Mask is probably my favorite game of all time. Wow. Majora's Mask has a very, I always say, and I hope when you get around to doing Majora's Mask in this series, I hope I'm invited back, because I have so much to say about that game. But Majora's Mask is an extraordinarily hopeful game. And I know that's a weird thing to say, because a lot of people view it as being like very oppressive and very like dark and stuff like that. But it's ultimately very hopeful. And I'm left with Link's Awakening. I'm also kind of left with a hopeful feeling. And I think it's sort of, and it's interesting that the writer, Yoshiaki Koizumi, who is now like a huge figure at Nintendo, and he was like, he wrote both of those games, Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask. He was the lead writer on both of them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And yeah. And he, and I think that he has like this kind of vibe. I think he cited things like Twin Peaks as an inspiration for Link's Awakening.
Makes sense.
And it makes perfect sense, right? It's supposed to feel just kind of off center. It's supposed to feel just kind of off. There's just something going on here. And, I love that we can sit there and pick that apart and talk about what that ending means to us, because I think that all of it is true. I think that, like what you were just saying about its kind of commentary on player agency is certainly true. And I think it also has something to say about the very nature of reality, the way we view reality. And maybe we take reality a little bit too seriously. Maybe we put a little bit too much stake into it, when really it can just easily, who's to say that we aren't in a Windfish's dream right now, and that we could just wake up. You know what I mean? So.
We were recording this at almost 4:00 on a Sunday afternoon. Like, it's nice and sunshiny, and we're having this weird, like, almost this conversation,
existential.
Like, totally. Like, this is the 11:30. This is the after midnight conversation that you have with, like, hey man, are we all just dreams of the wind?
It was just a dream, man.
Now, I do know that Link's Awakening is your favorite Zelda game in the franchise. And we talked quite a bit about it last time around, but since we've talked about it, I've had some kind of like maybe follow-ups, especially when it comes to the story. Because Link's Awakening is one of those bizarre games that really presents you with a lot of existential questions. And as I talk about it with people, I have to be reminded this is a Game Boy game. This is a game on the Game Boy that's presenting a lot of existential questions. So what's your interpretation of the ending? Was Link a dream of the windfish? Is it meant to be taken literally? Like, what's your take on that ending?
Honestly, I couldn't say. Part of me wants it all to be true, and part of me wants it to just be a dream. But that's kind of the beauty of the story, is the Link's Awakening could be either, and it's valid. I love that game so much just because it asks those questions. I remember the shocked feeling the first time I was playing through it and got to the point where one of the bosses says, you do realize that you're killing this island, right?
It's so brutal.
Like,
brutal. Yeah.
And then you have to come to terms with the reality of what you're doing. And then you're stuck with sort of that question of, well, if the island is real, then these monsters have to be destroyed. And if the island isn't real, then killing these monsters will end the island. But it's what I need to do to get back to the reality.
And I think for me, it also begs the question, would you prefer to stay in the dream? Because the dream's pretty good. I mean, you got a town full of talking animals and Marin, and, you know, it's pretty cool there. I mean, yeah, there's monsters and such, but, you know, good with the bad. Do you really want to leave? Do we want to stay asleep, or do we want to approach our reality?
Well, that's the beauty of the Game Boy, is as soon as you complete the game, you just reset it, and you start right back there at the end with everything done except for that final battle.
That's true. It's very true. You can do everything except actually wake. That's interesting. I always take it. I take it pretty literally. That's kind of my take. And I also think, and I've said this to a few people, so this might be a repeat of what I've said before, but I like to think, and I don't think this is intentional, but I almost feel like it's commenting on games itself, or I read it that way, in that you as the player, we are programmed to move forward, to complete the objective, to kill the 8 things, collect the 8 instruments, right? Move through the story, even though the game itself is telling you, no, don't do this. And I think there might, again, I don't know if it was intentional. I wish it would be, because I think it's really interesting and good. But to me, that reads a lot in there too, where it's kind of like, it was like a Bioshock.
It was Bioshocking before it was Bioshocking.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of Bioshocking, where it's commenting on the nature of games. Yeah, that's just another take I've had when I was playing it.
Well, and one of the things I really love about it is if you get through the entire game without dying once, there's a seagull that flies overhead.
Really?
Yeah, and the concept is that's Marin.
Wow,
because she says in that conversation on the beach, like, I wish I was a seagull. I wish I could be free and not tied to any place. I wish I could go out and explore. And so the idea that, like, if you beat the game without dying, as Link is laying on that log, a seagull flies overhead.
Wow. That's awesome. That's fantastic. I did not even know that. That's a really cool note. Huh, that's really, really cool.
Well, I think that speaks so much to the intention of the team that made it.
Just in case you haven't seen the time, we are about to land our rooster into the center of Mabe Village, or Mabe Village, not quite sure how you pronounce it, covering both bases. But before we close out the episode, let's talk to Andrew as he talks about Link's Awakening as a side project, something we've dabbled in a bit. Seth, as he shares, where does he want to live? Mabe? Animal Village? With the Windfish himself? Who knows? We'll find out. And then finally, Ryan, aka Games with Coffee, sends us off with one of my favorite little segments, his elevator pitch for why you should play Link's Awakening.
And I love the fact, and again, I've done, there's been a number of, videos done on Link's Awakening, so a lot of this information's out there, but how this was just a side project. They were just like, hey.
That started as a, can we port Link to the Past to Game Boy?
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's amazing what you can get when you get, amazing developers and storytellers together to just do something fun that they love. I mean, it's really, really, not to say they love their other titles, but yeah.
In a lot of cases, they were working on the game after hours. They were doing it in their free time. They were doing it out of love. And in the stories of old video game production, the best games were the games that were made out of love like that. This being a great example, Mega Man 2 was the same way, where they were told, but they went ahead and did it anyway.
Really? I didn't know that. Huh.
I mean, the Sony PlayStation exists because a group of people refused to let the dream die.
I don't know about you. Would you rather live in the main town? I forget the name of the main town in Link's Awakening, or the animal town? I don't know, because they both seem awesome.
Yeah, they do both seem awesome. Yeah, I love animals.
Right.
And I love to go back to, I remember feeling even just like little tiny things in A Link to the Past, like when you go up to the Master Sword and little animals are kind of like scattering and stuff. Like I love stuff like that. Yeah, it would be tough, right? I think I don't know. I do love animals, but there's also there is something kind of cozy about that opening town. Yeah, there really is something sort of just cozy, intimate about that. It would be hard for me to pick. I think that I love the idea of just, and I sort of live in a small town, so I do kind of like these small towns where like everybody knows everybody. I do kind of like that, especially coming from, like, I grew up in Chicago, so like coming to a smaller town is very refreshing to me. And I kind of like that vibe. I think I would probably just go with like the main town there.
Yeah. Plus you have a chain shop there, which is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And you get to take it out for walks and whatnot.
Exactly. Take it out for walks and chomps, right? I think that works out pretty good. That's awesome, man. I don't know. I think I might select that too, but I definitely would at least once a week, like, go to a restaurant or something in Animal Town, because I don't know, it's adorable and sweet and cute.
Let's say you know somebody who's kind of put off playing Link's Awakening, like me. Let's say you met me 3 years ago and said, "Hey, Bill, so I know you like Zelda. Yeah, I like Zelda too." And you go, "Do you like Link's Awakening?" And my answer would have been, "Yeah, I've never played it. I own it, but I've never really played it." How would you pitch me that game? How would you pitch me, here's why you should play Link's Awakening?
Okay, so knowing what I know about you right now versus 3 years ago, this might be a bit difficult, but if I had to pitch it, I would have to say, have you ever been given a choice, or have you ever been given an opportunity to examine whether or not the actions you perform in a game have any consequences on the environment around you? Because that is exactly what Link's Awakening actually explores in its subtext. Sure, it's a Zelda game. You have Link, you go and try to secure these 8 instruments to wake up a fish and leave the island. But what you're doing in the background is that you're actually causing a giant upheaval in people's lives, and eventually they're all going to disappear. Spoiler alert. So, but your actions will cause all these people to disappear. So would you actually go for it, or would you just not play it? I know it sounds like I'm trying to avert you from playing the game, but really you should really play the game just to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. And
my response would be, wait, you mean the Game Boy Legend of Zelda game, right? That you're talking about that game?
Yes,
like,
I'm
that
talking
would have
about that
literally
game. It is a case of existentialism in a Zelda game, which is something that you don't really see in a lot of games of that era, of that time. A game about existentialism? What is that? What are you talking about? Like, you'd see that usually with like indies. This is like indies before indies were cool. Let's put it that way.
And I remember that's an excellent pitch, and honestly, that would have been very much so of an ear perk up for me. Like, oh, okay, I thought this was just like Baby Link to the Past. Like,
no, not at all.
Baby Link to the Past, and it is most certainly not. Yeah, that's a very good elevator pitch.
Oh,
I think I would totally take it into account for sure.
Would I? I don't know. When I asked Ryan that question, I was implying an adult, someone my age or slightly younger, casual gamer, sitting around a virtual water cooler or Zoom meeting, just chatting about games. And I think, as an adult, I've heard that argument before, and that's what enticed me to finally play it, to say, oh, wow, really? It's not just Baby Link to the Past? Cool, I'll check it out. But a lot of this show, of course, is about our recollections as kids. Link's Awakening was released in 1993. I was 13 years old. I was not playing the Game Boy. I was in Super Nintendo mode. I was 16-bit Bit Wars, arguing with my Genesis friends. I was not interested in anything black and white or green and gray. That was for my brother. That was his system anyway. He played it. Have fun with that. I got 16 bits. So if you had given me that very eloquent, well-worded argument as a kid, I would have just said no. It would have bounced right off of me. And it would have been to my detriment. Now, most of the guests I had on this episode are a little younger than I. Maybe 5 years younger, to same age. That puts them around 8 or 9, and that is in the pocket for playing this game in a very special way, which is just as a game. I can absolutely see an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old pick this game up, put it into their Game Boy, snuggle up underneath the covers and get absorbed into this world and take everything literally. Just play it like a fable. And as a fun, lovely, wonderfully crafted fairy tale, it works. And then once they become adults, they see this game, still fun, still enjoyable, still lovely, but now there's more context and meaning. You can enjoy it on a different level. And both of those levels are wonderful. And I think that's what Link's Awakening at the end of the day does beautifully well, and it's why it's a classic, a beloved classic. It works on multiple levels for anyone from a 9-year-old to a jaded 13-year-old to a 40-year-old dad to someone who's 70 and still wants to experience the simple joys of a 4-bit game in a magical world with some interesting story and beloved characters. And that, in my opinion, is a big part of what makes a game timeless. And while I know I've said that word a lot on this show over the last couple of months, we're talking about The Legend of Zelda. It is what it is. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. I did all the admin at the front and throughout the show, so I will just say Twitter at A Gamer Looks at 40, Instagram at A Gamer Looks at 40, and there's a Discord. I'll have that information on my link tree in the Twitter bio. Go there, sign up. We're doing some fun stuff on there, trying to build out the community. It is a good time, so come on by. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And until next time, may your dreams be as vibrant as the windfishes.